This is the demilitarized zone that separates North Korea from South Korea. And it's well protected with heavy barbed wire fences, minefields, and it is meant to prevent any incursions by the enemy. And as you can see, it's still serious business. This is a South Korean guard post in the demilitarized zone, and it's a very tranquil and quiet place. But that really belies the truth, because less than 2 kilometers away is North Korea. And beyond their borders are more than 1 million North Korean soldiers who are poised to potentially attack the South. And on the southern side, more than 600,000 South Korean soldiers are awaiting such an eventuality. But what's amazing about these hills is that in 1951 to 1953, more than 20,000 Canadians served here, exactly in this position.
The night seems to be so long, you think the sun is never going to come up. You imagined all kinds of things in the dark. I mean, you're standing there by yourself, and the other guy in a slit trench. Your nerves keep you on edge because you know that there are people out there. It's a waiting game, and you're waiting for the inevitable.
We're driving through Seoul, and Seoul is one huge, vibrant city. It's very modern. I don't see any buildings that date over 30 years. More or less any will date back to the Korean War. All I've seen of Seoul are the old archival photographs, which really shows the place as a ruin. So it's going to be interesting to try to find out what remnants of the Korean War we can find. This is the National Cemetery in Seoul, and it's an enormous and beautiful place, and you can see why they call it the spirit of the nation. We often think of the Korean War as being somewhat small. When you come here and see the enormity of the suffering of the Korean people, you get a better understanding. There's a building just ahead that is even more poignant. It's the Memorial to the Missing. This is a very moving place. It lists the names of more than 100,000 South Korean troops who were missing during the Korean War. And what's even more powerful is this, the floral tributes, the photographs of the soldiers. These men have not been forgotten. During the Korean War, 21 nations, including Canada, came to assist South Korea. But the question remains, why were Canadians fighting in a country that no one had ever heard of? In August 1945, the Americans dropped atomic bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and the Second World War came to an end. But the period afterwards became one of turbulence, as our old ally Joseph Stalin started to absorb countries in Eastern Europe. And an iron curtain descended across that area, and it appeared that war was going to occur. In 1949, Mao Zedong's communists defeated the Chinese nationalists, and the focus of the Cold War turned to Asia. There was a possibility of war between Communist China and Formosa, but no one dreamed anything would happen in Korea. But they were wrong. This is the grave of a South Korean soldier killed on June 26, 1950. He was one of thousands of South Korean soldiers killed in the North Korean invasion.
The Asiatic crisis point becomes Korea. Korea and its southern capital, Seoul, where violent warfare reached its peak following invasion from the Red-dominated North. The Blitz-like attack slightly more than 700 air miles from Tokyo saw the Russian-backed North Korean army roll down past the 38th parallel, the line of demarcation between the communist stronghold and the Southern Republic. In the capitals of the globe, there were undisguised uneasiness and grave concern that here might be the prelude to a wider atomic conflict.
The UN immediately condemns the brutal invasion and demands a complete withdrawal of all communist forces. The North Koreans ignore the warning, and by the 27th, they are poised to capture the South Korean capital of Seoul. This is the Han River, and today it separates North Seoul from South Seoul. But in 1950, Seoul was a much smaller city, and it was completely on the north side. And there was only one bridge across the Han River. In late June 1950, the civilian population heard about the great successes of the North Korean invading army, and panic set in, and their only way out was this bridge. Throughout June 26th and June 27th, tens of thousands of refugees crossed this bridge, fleeing to the south. By the 27th, it was clear that Seoul was going to fall to the North Koreans. And although the bridge was full of thousands of refugees, the South Korean army had to make the hard decision to blow the bridge. The destruction of the Han River Bridge kills more than 800 South Koreans, but stops the North Korean tanks from advancing. Now, those remaining in Seoul are trapped and at the mercy of the approaching communists. Among them is a 22-year-old student, Cap Chong-chi.
That morning, before noon, I didn't know. Rumor is around the Han River gone, exploded. And then, no way out. Now I cannot get out. Around 10 o'clock on the street, tanks coming, so everybody, now the North Korean here. So many bodies in town, and they cut up the bamboo shoot, they kill that. They don't need any ammunition. Only I saw 2 eyes out by the bamboo shoot. I saw that. And finally, I asked with my friend, let's go, get out Seoul. I made red band, looks like a communist, and a special mission. Many people lined up to waiting the ferry. I asked who in charge of here. Somebody, the North Korean communist. So I told him, very low voice, we are special mission to South. That's why we get the boat, cross the river, and the bandits were out. Let's go we are now free.
Cap Chong Chi joins tens of thousands of others fleeing the communists. Within days, the North Koreans bridge the Han River and continue south, pushing back the remnants of the South Korean army. It's now clear that South Korea will cease to exist unless someone comes to their assistance and comes quickly. Okay, we're driving on the main highway just north of Seoul, and in this position, the communists are just about a kilometer on the other side of the river. And this area is critical to any advance that the communists would want to make, so there are a large number of tank obstacles located on the highway. And the overpass we're coming up to is one of those tank obstacles. It looks like a commercial sign and a regular overpass, but it's not. It's actually huge slabs of concrete suspended above 3 columns. And what would happen is, in an emergency situation, they would blow the columns and these large slabs of concrete would come down and provide an obstacle for any communist armor. After the capture of Seoul in June 1950, communist troops led by T-34 tanks moved south, crushing all opposition. The situation deteriorates so quickly, the UN is forced to act. It realizes if it does not get troops on the ground immediately, South Korea will be lost. Throughout July, thousands of Americans arrive in Korea and are quickly thrown into battle. But their numbers are insufficient to stem the momentum of the communist advance. By early August, the Americans and South Koreans are beaten back and on the verge of defeat. They will make their final stand defending a small corner of Korea known as the Pusan Perimeter. This is the Nakdong River, and in the summer of 1950, it was the western wall of what was known as the Pusan Perimeter. Pusan Perimeter was all that was left of South Korea, and the North Koreans had every intention of crushing that position. On the west side of this bridge were the North Koreans, and on the east side were the ROC Army. And they would face off in one of the most decisive battles of the war. We're very fortunate to have found Mr. Kim. He served with the 1st ROC Division, which is the Republic of Korean Army, in 1950, and he fought at the 38th parallel, and he fought here on the Nakdong River.
저건 강건 내에서 낙동강 건너에서 치고 골자고 하고요. 물로 기도라 물로 막 돌아. 그때 물이 참 깊었어요. 강물이 물로 돌아오니까 언젠가 깊어놓으니까 돌아오지를 못합니다. 강원대 좀 돌아오면 우리는 여기서 사기를 일을 하지요. 초만 좀 죽지요. 당시 이 낙동강 물이 처음에는 말이죠. 맑았습니다. 물이 맑았는데 나중에는 한 달간 더 들어가고 나니까 낙동강 물이 벌겠어요. 얼마나 많이 죽고 났던 또. 예.
The North Koreans attacked with superior numbers of tanks and men. But after weeks of fighting, they still cannot crack the UN line. This incredible defense is assisted in large part by the Americans' complete domination of the air. Each communist attack is punished by devastating airstrikes of napalm and high explosive.
이제 태국 우리로서 태국을 우리 군인들 태국 먹고 급파를 못했습니다. 강원리에 접대 있으니까 저 건리 있고 하니까 비행기를 폭격을 했는데. 참 심하기 때문에 저기 많이 희생이 많이 돼버리고, 예, 우리 국군에도 큰 도움이 됐죠. 예, 날라가겠죠.
On September 15th, 1950, the Americans deliver a decisive blow with the landing of 70,000 Marines at Incheon. Over the next 6 weeks, the UN destroys the North Korean army and advances towards the Chinese border. But just when complete victory is in sight, the tide of war once again turns. On November 26, 1950, 200,000 Chinese communist troops attack the UN forces and catch them by complete surprise. Within days, the UN forces are in full retreat. The communists inflict terrible casualties on the UN forces and drive them back 200 miles into South Korea. The question of how to deal with the Chinese intervention, whether to strike at targets in China or even use nuclear weapons, paralyzes the American government. The world stands on the brink of total war. It is during this desperate period the first Canadian troops arrive in Korea. We're on a Korean Navy patrol boat just off the port of Busan, or Pusan as it was called during the Korean War. Today you can see it's a very busy port in a city of about 4 million people, but that's not the way it was during the Korean War. Pusan was the port of entry for most Canadians arriving from Japan. It's about a 200-kilometer trip across the sea. And of course, as the men arrived, they would go by the exotic islands, the fishing boats, and see that this was truly a strange land.
Miles off the coast of Korea, barely able to see land, we smelled it. Night soil used on rice paddies was one of the ingredients. I suppose plain old garbage from the port of Pusan contributed to the odor. Someone on deck remarked that if the world needed an enema, they would no doubt insert the tube here. Hours later, we docked in Pusan. So this is Korea.
The first group to come over were the 2nd Patricias. And when they arrived, they were met at the port and quickly put into trucks and taken out into hills for training because they were about to participate in the upcoming United Nations offensive against the communists. The 2nd Battalion PPCLI is fortunate to have an experienced commanding officer, a highly decorated Second World War veteran, Lieutenant Colonel Jim Stone. Stone puts his men through 6 weeks of rigorous training, hoping it will be enough to prepare them for the tough fighting ahead, in difficult terrain and against an unknown enemy.
There seems to be a whole pile of false peaks. Yeah. I know where we crossed the valley floor. It wasn't very wide.
We are traveling through central Korea trying to find the route the Canadians took on their way to join the UN offensive in early 1951. With me is Dave Crook, who has returned to this part of Korea for the first time to try and retrace the steps he took as a 19-year-old private with the 2nd Battalion, Princess Patricias. What we're going to do now is we're going to try to find the village called Chomni. And really, Chomni is the jump-off point for the Canadians in the Korean War. So, Dave, this is Chomni, where you first came into the line. Do you recognize it?
Not really. I mean, types of buildings are the same, but I don't recognize them. We weren't here that long.
What do you remember about going into the line for the first time?
Well, just up here. Well, when we first got here, before we bedded down for the night, we turned and looked out into the field here, and there was Americans that had been slaughtered by the Chinese. It was probably 50 or 60. Never counted them, of course. But they were all caught in their sleeping bags. At first, I didn't really understand what it was, and people started saying, look, most of the guys were half out of their bags, some not even out of their bags, some out of their bags completely. They shot them all, yeah, they just killed them all. They had no guards posted, no nothing. They just went to sleep. They thought they were in some kind of Disney World or something, I don't know.
They thought they were safe?
Yeah, I guess they just figured that the war was like way up there somewhere. That's about the first time I realized that the seriousness of what I'd gotten myself into. You know, I joined the Army because I was mad at my girlfriend. And here I am now. Somebody's maybe going to take a shot at me, and I'm not sure I really like that. I'm questioning my wisdom quite a bit at that time. In fact, all that night and the next morning moving out, I'm thinking, Jesus, what have I done? You know, and I'm sure I wasn't the only guy thinking that way.
On February 21st, 1951, the UN begins its offensive with the Patricias leading the advance into the hills. They meet little opposition, and it appears the Chinese are fighting a delaying action to cover a full retreat. For the untested Canadians, it will be their first taste of the treacherous Korean terrain of steep mountains in cold winter conditions. We're going to try to find Hill 419, which is where the Patricias had their first real action in February 1951. It's a whole pile of these hills. Here's a saddle over here. Look there. I bet you that's it. So this could be our baby over here. That looks like it there.
Could be. It depends what's up here. I think around the bend there.
Okay, we'll go up a little further. Because we came back.
It wasn't that hill. That's too high.
But that means.
Yeah, that looks more like it.
Okay, we'll get in. Let's go back and try it one more time.
Okay.
So you think that this is it?
Well, it sure as hell looks like it.
Did you? I thought you said you came down the valley and attacked up the other side.
No. We came down this way and up this way.
Okay.
This is the hill I think we went up and dug in that night.
409.
Whatever this hill is, I have no idea. But this is the hill that I think is 419. But I could be wrong.
So you think this is it?
It sure looks like it to me. I mean, it all fits. It's about the right height. Saddle's there. The other company was dug on the reverse slope there.
Hey, come down here and show us where
And
you
we were up here.
Show me we were dug in, how it's set up.
Yeah, well, we were dug in on that ridge line up there. When I get up there, the first night in the line, and the platoon commander comes along and says, "Come on with me." I said, "What do you want?" He said, "We're going on a recce." I said, "Wait a minute, I just got here." I said, "Somebody else must have more experience." He said, "No, you're going and the radio man." So we came down this draw here, crossed the valley floor, and went up that draw there, I don't know, maybe 200 yards up there, and came back up the hill, and got up the top, and I thought, oh, geez, I did a great job. First light comes, platoon sergeant comes along and says, "Platoon commander wants to see you." Oh, what have I done now? So I go down and he said, "Since you were down there with me yesterday, you can lead the company." Well, holy shit, I just got here and here, what am I doing on? You know, and I thought they were picking on me or something, but that's just the way it turned out. I led the company up to about halfway up the hill. Platoon sergeant tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Stop. This is as far as we go." And the other company came through just as the first section stepped over a sort of line, you could almost say. The machine gun opened up and cut them all down almost, the whole goddamn section. And I was like one step from going around that corner. And we never did get up there that day. The Chinese took off, and we got up to the top without any more casualties, nothing. We got there, and the 4 Canadians that were killed were laying stripped of their clothes. Well, it's the first casualty that I'd seen that way. I mean, they had some other ones, but that was the first one I'd seen.
So how did that affect your nerves?
Didn't have time to think about it. I mean, yeah, kind of sorry to see 4 guys, but hey, glad it's not me. About the way you think after a while.
Did you think the Chinese were gone for good?
Yeah, it looked that way. It looked like they were going back to China or something, because they seemed to be pulling back. As soon as you hit them hard, they just disappear. But they had other plans, of course, as we all found out.
The withdrawal of the Chinese army is deceptive. In reality, over 400,000 communist troops are preparing for a massive counterstroke against the advancing UN forces. We're just coming into Capion village right now, and this is the location where the second Patricius came in April 1951. And Dave, do you recognize it?
I don't see a thing I know, quite frankly. There was nothing here when I was here. It was just a couple of mud huts.
So what were you anticipating when you moved into this location?
The guys were enjoying the rest area, doing the normal stuff that they do there. That's when we got the order to move out. We knew we were in for something, but we didn't know it was that big. I mean, or as big as it turned out to be.
On April 22nd, the Chinese launch a massive offensive, breaking through the front at several points. The Patricias and the Australians are immediately ordered to dig in and prepare defensive positions astride the Capion River Valley. But it's a difficult position to defend. Hill 677 is a steep ridge, 1.5 miles across, and the Patricias have only 700 men to hold the final line, defending the road to Seoul.
You can see that we're walking right up here, so right around this area.
Right.
And you guys were spread out on these major hills up over here.
Right.
Now you said that Stone went out and reconnoitered it beforehand, and he picked very specific positions.
Yeah, I think that was a big part of the action. I think if he hadn't come out in front here and had a look at it from the enemy's perspective, we probably would have been at a disadvantage. I think looking down from up there, down this way, wouldn't have had the same picture. So I think he's very smart that way.
The ones he picked seem to be very, very steep.
Yeah, they are. They're, I don't know how the Chinese figured they're ever going to get up there, because it is steep. I couldn't even climb it today, I don't think.
So when did you know the Chinese had arrived?
This valley was full of refugees and soldiers streaming south. Just hundreds and hundreds of people, and they're going as fast as their little legs can carry them, and we're still here, and you're saying, holy Christ, what are we doing here? You could see the bodies, and they were just absolutely terrified. They were wanting to get out of there. They didn't care how. They're walking, running, they're on trucks, they're hanging off the side, anything that's moving. And you really start to think about what's going to happen when your turn comes. And that road was just full of people. And when the Australians pulled out, they honked their horns and did all that stuff to get people to move out of the way. But if they didn't get out of the way, they just ran over them. And people were trying to climb on the trucks, and the Australians were beating them off with their rifle butts and stuff like that.
So only the patricians are blocking the road to Seoul.
Only us, yeah. We're the only ones left. And I think Stone made it pretty clear that when we were put up there, he wasn't going to go backwards. He was going to stay. It was stay or die.
As 20,000 ROC soldiers retreat southward, tens of thousands of Chinese troops pursue them, flooding the Kapiong River Valley. Now all that remains between the communists and the road to Seoul is the 700 men of the Princess Patricias.
This is your position over here. This is the back of B. And
Right.
you guys are up at the top there, looking out over the river valley.
Yeah.
What did you see?
Chinese troops coming down in formations, you know, like 6 abreast, walking down the road like they're out for a Sunday walk, but at a double trot. It was like the Roman legions coming down the road. And these guys are coming on like nothing was going to stop them. And we, you know, wondered if we could, I guess. I kind of forgot what my thoughts were, but I think I was scared shitless just looking at them. And I think that we realized we're in for a good fight before the night was out. Waiting is the worst part of it. You don't know where they really are until they get up real close. I can remember firing my rifle, and I don't even know what I was shooting at. Because it looked like there was so many, I figured I couldn't miss anyway. I don't know how they managed to make those guys keep going. Just that part right there is so steep. My God, how did they get up there? Or how did they think they were going to get up there? But they sure as hell tried.
We are climbing up to the top of B Company's position to see if anything remains of the battle. It's very steep and there are no trails, so I doubt any Canadians have been up here since 1951.
This is the high point of B Company's position. It's right on the crest of the hill. And you can see here that there's slit trenches all over the place. So I guess it would be like a 2-man slit trench. Of course, it would be a lot deeper then. And they can mount their Brens on the top here. But what's amazing is how steep this hill is. I don't know how the Chinese would have got up here. They'd have to crawl up tree to tree. So you can see how the men could have rolled the grenades down or just kept the pepper fire on them. One of the problems with the Chinese was that they were very quiet. They had rubber shoes, they had cotton uniforms. They were very good at infiltration techniques. So often, even though the terrain was so difficult, they could surprise people. However, on the 24th, 25th of April, they weren't able to surprise the Princess Pats, and they really took it to them as they tried to force their way up these positions. But as the Chinese infiltrated, men further on the ground took care of them. There was a lot of heavy machine guns mounted on half-tracks down in the valley.
Stone's strategy for the defense of Kapiong is simply brilliant. One of his best decisions is to locate his half-tracks mounted with 30 and 50 caliber machine guns behind B Company's position. With the men manning the machine guns is Lieutenant Hub Gray.
It's an eerie sight. 500 men advancing towards us and not a discernible sound from any of them. It's as though we are watching unheralded ghosts intent upon harvesting their prey. I alert the men manning the 8 machine guns, telling them not to fire until I give the order. Their leading formation is about 40 meters short of the crest. After what seems an eternity, I order the machine guns to open fire.
We could hear when they cut loose with the machine guns down there. I'm sure they lost probably 4/5 of those people. A 50 caliber machine gun is, it's about as big as your thumb. It goes through 4 people before it stops. Take your head right off. Out of your sight, and after dark, you can't see. You just hear the noise over there. You really don't know what's going on. You hope it's all good. And of course, it turned out that most of it was.
We're on the peak of the hill that was B Company's position. This is one of the slit trenches, and here they fought off the Chinese attack on the night of 24-25 April 1951. But while this attack was going on, the Chinese were going to launch another attack against D Company on the hills right over here. This is the Capion River Gorge, and at this point, part of the communist forces split and went off to the left to attack Canadian positions at A Company, or particularly B Company, and a second group split off in this direction to try to take out the positions up on the heights over here. And some of the fiercest fighting took place at D Company's position right on that knob up there. The men are located on all the high points, and really, if the Chinese want them, they're going to have to come up and get them.
While the Chinese attacked the positions at B Company, another wave of communists sweep west and attack up the steep ridges leading to the Canadian positions on Hill 677. The Chinese realize if they can take the position on the heights, the whole Canadian line will collapse.
So we're trying to find a route up to 677, and so far we haven't found one, but this looks promising, but it's very, very steep.
저 위로 올라가는 길은 산으로 더 올라가는 길은 아예 없는 겁니까? 여기서 이제 등산로가 가들기라고 저 꼭대기라고 저 백두리 종쪽까지 가는 데가 있고요. 등산로가.
And only from here there is a small trail walking up to the hill. So
Like up there?
you cannot drive. So from here you have to walk over.
This is one of the ridges that leads up towards 677. It's one of the few approaches that the Chinese could have taken. But if I'm one of the Chinese soldiers at this point, I'm thinking mutiny. This is an incredible hard climb, and I still got another couple hundred meters to go before I'm even going to meet the Canadians. And you can see how hard this would be, but you're talking maybe 50 men versus maybe 300-400. So the odds are stacked against the Patricias, but the terrain is in their favor. This is an amazing find. This appears to be one of the gun pits of 12th Platoon East. And the fact that, it's obviously sunk in by quite a lot, but it's located about 50 yards from the top of the hill. This is the correct location for it. 12th Platoon was split in two. The other part was on the other side of this ridge. This area was protected from 11th Platoon, which was up in this area here. As you can see, there's almost no chance for the Chinese to get up in this area. But this is a real piece of Canadian history. From here, they could have their Bren guns, and they had about 2 sections of men operating out of this area. But what's really happening, this area was safe, but on the other side of this ridge, things are going really bad, and there's some incredible fighting going on at 10th Platoon.
Fortunately, number 10 platoon is commanded by an experienced Second World War veteran, Lieutenant Mike Levy. Throughout the early morning of the 25th, Levy's men repulsed wave after wave of determined enemy attacks. We've only walked over about, 30 yards from the other position, and this is on the west side of the hill. 3 o'clock in the morning, they broke through here, and they put total attacks on Mike Levy's number 10 platoon. Now, this is all taking place, like I said, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. The Chinese are all over the place. Levy's defense of this position is quite exceptional. And in the end, he calls on a 40-minute bombardment on his own positions.
The artillery support is awesome. Without it, we could not sustain ourselves. The continuing attacks involve hundreds or even thousands of brave Chinese soldiers, seemingly exhibiting no fear of dying.
The stand of both 10 platoon and 12 platoon saved the day. They stopped the Chinese here cold. Even by the early morning, the Chinese were already starting to pull back. Maybe it was foolish that the Chinese even tried to take these positions, and in the end, they couldn't. They were outfought by the Canadians and their artillery. By the morning of April 25th, after 8 hours of heavy fighting, the Chinese stopped their attacks on the Canadians. The stubborn defense by the Patricias inflicts terrible casualties on the Chinese and prevents the communist breakthrough. Although the Patricias fight off an attacking force of 7,000 Chinese, they suffer remarkably few casualties, with only 10 killed and 23 wounded, a testament to the skill with which the position had been organized and defended. The stand by the Patricias at Kapyong was exceptional, but it took a Korean to truly respect their achievement by raising a monument to their memory. It is no accident that this man who so honors the Canadians is himself a survivor of the Korean War, Kap Chong-chi. This is an amazingly sincere gesture by the Korean people to remember the Canadians, and it's very touching as a Canadian to come back and to see this. It's deeply touching.
Well, not only the Canadians, even Koreans, we got to remember. I mentioned the battle map. That's the 250 CLI sector, 677, right there.
When I come to a place like this and I see where I was on this stone and I can look up at the hill there and see the actual spot, it's powerful. It's very moving, and you start to remember some things that you kind of like to have forgotten. But it is really, really great to see this. It's wonderful. It's a great tribute to the Canadian people from you. Thank you.
Before we leave, I want to present to the Korean War veterans to this stone, this present to your all the battlefield stone.
Thank you so much.
Killed at Kapyong, Maurice Carr, Gerald Evans, Leslie Fielding, Leo Gladieux, Curtis Hayes, Joseph Lassard, Earl McCaskill, Bruce McDonald, Walter Marshall, Robert Tolver, Robert Walker, Thomas Wotan.
I look at the place where we were and remember what happened there. Remember the people that died there. And sometimes it's tough to talk about it. You keep saying to yourself, why me? How come I'm still here? And there isn't an answer. You can't answer it. You don't know why.
The battle fought by the patricias in these hills was a magnificent defensive action, and in the history of the Canadian Army is probably one of the best small unit actions ever fought. And over the next few months, the patricias will be joined by thousands of other Canadian soldiers as they start to drive north, over more hills, through more valleys, and into North Korea. This is a Chinese trench that dates from the Korean War, and it's incredible to find this because very little remains of the Korean War. Typically, the Chinese dug these trenches into the heights, which gave the defenders the maximum advantage. This is a gun pit he would use, and you can see the advantage that the defender would have on any attackers. What's remarkable about this position is that it was captured by the Canadians during the action at Shaylee. During May and June 1951, the Canadians would join with United Nations forces in a major offensive to drive the communists back into North Korea. And to be successful, they would have to overcome positions such as this and a very determined enemy.
I just started running up towards the command post, and I saw this figure looming out of the dark. And then the next thing I saw was something coming through the air. It was a bowling pin grenade. It bounced off my chest, and I had two ways to go. I went right, the grenade had gone left.
This is the South Gate, and it's one of the few buildings that remains from ancient Korea, and it's even one of the few buildings that remains from the Korea of 1950s. One of the problems in retracing the steps of the Korean War is so much has changed that there's only a few buildings that still remain. This is a 14th century Asian-type pagoda, and you can actually see the bullet holes from the occupation of Seoul in 1950 by North Korean forces. And of course, there's one other place we can go, which is the old traditional market. This is the Namdaemun market, and it's a traditional Korean market, much like one of those that you would have seen in the 1950s or during the war. Mind you, the product lines have changed. There's a lot of traditional Korean fare, and I'm going to buy a traditional Korean hot dog on a stick with French fries stuck in the side. It looks like quite a delicacy. Get one of these. Thank you. This is very good for your cholesterol. Markets like this are vanishing in Korea, but of course, during the war and afterwards, this is where all the commerce was done. And it still has a traditional flavor to it, just like the ketchup on my hot dog. Between 1951 and 1953, more than 20,000 Canadians fought in Korea. And although the country has changed dramatically, if we look hard enough, we can still uncover evidence of the war. So during the Korean War, one of the things that everybody talks about, every one of the veterans, is the Korean porters and how they carried all the supplies up the hills. And one of the things they used was these A-frames. And they're still being used today in the market here. I guess you can rent them out and they can come and deliver product to somebody in the market. But it's amazing that this is what everybody talks about, and here's an example of one of them.
Since June 1950, Korea has been a battleground. A series of fierce battles between United Nations forces and the communist armies of North Korea and China have left the country in ruins and claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. By the spring of 1951, the communist armies have captured territory south of the 38th parallel. But now the UN is gearing up for a massive counterstroke. Joining the UN forces are thousands of newly arrived Canadian soldiers under the command of Brigadier John Rockingham. This special contingent of volunteers is known as the 25th Canadian Infantry Brigade. We're driving through the valleys where the 25th Canadian Infantry Brigade advanced in May 1951. It was part of the push north towards the 38th parallel, and this was the first action for a number of the Canadian battalions, including the 2nd Battalion Royal Canadian Regiment. And with me is Ed Master Nardi, who's coming back to this area for the first time since 1951. And Ed, what was it like for you guys before you came into the line here?
Rockingham wanted us all to get into shape. So he conceived an exercise called Charlie Horse, which was to be a series of company attacks up hills just outside of Pusan. I had 20 scouts and snipers, and we climbed the hill twice a day, and using blank ammunition, we were to be the enemy, the Chinese. Rockingham was determined that we weren't going to move anywhere until he felt we were ready.
After only 2 weeks of training, the Canadians are ordered into action, and they begin their advance north through the Pusan Valley, pursuing the fleeing Chinese army. So this is the Pusan Valley,
Yes,
where you fought.
that's right.
May 1951, and today it's a resort. There's hiking trails all through your old battlefield.
And a lot of very happy-looking people. Women, children. It makes me very happy that I came to see it again. It was different then, though. It wasn't all the vegetation. And because of the bombing.
And it'd be clear of trees.
Be clear of trees, because with the napalm, they would have burned the trees off. You see.
Right.
And probably almost halfway down.
So you would then, would you go up the crests, or would you go?
We went up the crests. We followed those ridge lines. Canadians, we were like that. We always looked at the high ground. High ground is a dominant feature. It's the hardest work, but it is the safest way to go. It's worth the sweat.
So this is your first taste of battle.
It was the first day, May the 25th in the afternoon. We came on 407, and I was moving up 407, and I, trying to set a good example for the men, I took the point. About a third of the way up 407, as I moved around a corner, a Chinese soldier came from underneath the boulders. I didn't see him at all. He was just going to shoot me in the back, and my signaler shot him. And I saw these Chinese going down, and Kamaz took a big smile on their face and said, "You owe me one." We just started, and how close that I had come, and it made me realize that, you know, this was going to be serious. They were just trying to slow us down at this point. And we thought they would keep doing that. But that turned out not to be the case. They finally stopped, and they were going to stop us.
By the end of May, the UN push towards North Korea begins to stall. The 2nd RCRs are ordered north to secure the village of Shaylee and capture the dominating height of Hill 467. But the Canadians are unaware that Shaylee protects a critical communist supply route, and the Chinese are unlikely to give it up without a fight. We are on the outskirts of the village of Shaylee, which was the battlefield of the 2nd RCR at the end of May 1951. One of the Canadians who fought here was Ed Master Nardi.
Well, the country was certainly very different than anything you're used to. You're going into a completely strange environment.
Oh, absolutely. And remember, too, that it was so miserable for the people. I mean, well, they were virtually all refugees. They were frightened. They were terrified. They were frightened. And looking around here and being able to sit in this place, in this village, after what, the shattering and the shelling and the cleaning it took, it kind of seemed like it was kind of all worthwhile. And it was really wonderful. And it kind of makes you feel kind of proud.
I'll have some more beer myself. Ed, ready to go?
Yeah.
We're gonna go and try to find your old route up to Hill 467.
Okay, let's do that.
On May 30th, the Canadians spearhead the UN advance north. And at 7 a.m., the 700 men of the RCRs launched their assault towards the village of Shaylee. The plan calls for a four-pronged assault. A Company will lead the attack to secure the village. B and C are to protect the flanks, while D Company attacks the main objective, the high ground on Hill 467.
In the distance, I could see 467. We thought they're going to have to stop somewhere. And we figured that probably would be it. And Rockingham decided he was going to hold the brigade there. And he no sooner stopped us than we heard pop, 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 pop.
So Ed, do you recognize any of these features?
Oh, yes. This looks like the two Twin Peak, 464, 467. I look at the hills and I think of all the centuries. And here they are, still the same, exactly the same. And for centuries being the same. There have been a lot of campaigns waged over here, I'm sure. It's a very appropriate day to be here. I can feel it like it was. Yeah, yeah. In that direction is the Churwan Valley, and that was the main supply route from Manchuria for the Chinese troops. So that's why they reacted to our arrival here.
You poked a hornet's nest.
Yes, we poked a hornet's nest. A Company was to leave at 6 o'clock in the morning, and at that time there was an airstrike planned, but the weather was so bad, it had been a driving rain all night, that they had to cancel the airstrike. We couldn't get the proper artillery support. But one of the critical things was the maps we had were based on pre-war Japanese maps, and their scale was different. It wasn't until we did the actual reconnaissance and they said, oh my God, we're too far apart. The valley was so cloudy and misty, you could only see a few hundred yards up the road. Because when Medlin and A Company left on the half tracks and the tanks moved up towards Shaylee itself, they'd gone about maybe 300 or 400 yards and just disappeared in the mist. We couldn't see them.
This is the old village of Shaylee, and on May 30th, 1951, it was the objective of A Company of the Royal Canadian Regiment. By 7 a.m.,
They had secured the village, and of course this allowed the other parts of the operation to take place, particularly against 467, the big height to the north. But by 11 a.m., all along the front, everyone was noticing a lot more Chinese activity. They were mortaring the positions, there was more artillery coming in. And here in Shaylee, they could see that the Chinese were trying to infiltrate around their positions to the rice paddies in the south and along the ridges to the north. From here you can see where C Company would have been on that ridge over here. And of course they had a pretty quiet day. It was so dark and the mist was so low that they really couldn't do much up there, but they held their positions well. But on the big height, you can see the Twin Peaks up there at 467. The fighting was really intensifying.
The men of D Company advance up the steep ridges leading to the summit of Hill 467. But as they near the top, they come under heavy machine gun fire from well-entrenched Chinese positions.
This is one of the ridges that leads to the top of Hill 467. And this position was very important to the Chinese. And you can see this by the fact they dug in so well that even after 50 years, their gun pits are still here. You can see they used stone. You can see a little mound here to protect the gunner. And of course, it's here to protect the re-entrant on this side of the ridge. On the morning of May 30th, 1951, 11 platoon of the Royal Canadian Regiment stormed this ridge and, believe it or not, took it very quickly. And then they proceeded to advance to the summit. They were supposed to meet up with number 12 platoon, who were advancing up that ridge over there. The problem is the Chinese machine guns on the summit had stopped their advance and inflicted many casualties.
We were coming up a well-worn path to a bit of an open area when a machine gun opened up. Some of the guys were left in the open. Paddy O'Connor said, "To hell with it. I'm going after my boys."
As the battle for 467 rages, the situation deteriorates. Despite the courage of the Canadians, they've yet to capture the crest. Desperate for information on why the attack is stalled, the CO orders his intelligence officer, Ed Master Nardi, to find out what's going wrong.
So you've been told to go and find out what's going on.
What's going on, exactly, because we couldn't get communication, and we're getting all these reports that the Chinese were moving down, and we wanted to know, well, where are they?
So up here,
we couldn't see anything.
You come up this valley.
Yeah.
Now, those are the two peaks, right?
Yeah.
That's 464?
467, that's right.
Okay.
And they were moving up, they were moving up that side, there.
Okay. What did you think when you saw them?
I said, oh my God, we got a problem. And then when I reported it to Keane, the first thing he had to do was to tell Rockingham. And when he told Rockingham, with Midland in trouble here, he had ordered Keane to pull back to the start line.
Does the Rockingham make the decision right away?
Oh yeah, right away. If we hadn't had so much experience in these men, it would have been a disaster. But a lot of the guys were Second War vets, and they cooled down the new guys, and this was you couldn't have had a more important learning experience for what was to come in the future than the battle we fought here.
At Shaylee, the RCRs fought a bitter battle against the odds. Although they came close to being surrounded, skillful leadership and experience helped them avert disaster. In the end, they suffered 31 casualties, including 6 killed.
It made us a fighting battalion, and also it tested the mettle of the men and the leadership, which, taking everything into consideration, was really excellent. We were ready for war, and we couldn't have been as ready for war unless we'd gone through this.
The next day, attacking with overwhelming numbers and air support, Shaylee falls to the Americans. And over the next month, the UN forces continue to push back an exhausted Chinese army. In July 1951, the Chinese surprised the UN by requesting peace talks. It now appears that the Korean War may soon be over. We're on the road to Panmunjom, which is the joint security area, which is where North Korea and South Korea actually meet. And it's there that they try to negotiate any changes or issues that take place even today. It was also the location of the peace talks back in the fall of 1951. So it's just further on down the road, but it's right in the demilitarized zone. So as we go along, you go through stages of militarization. And as we get closer, you can see more gun emplacements, more soldiers, and more barbed wire, because you're really getting now back into what is a war zone. This is the joint security area at Panmunjom, and this is where the peace treaty negotiations took place during most of the Korean War. Today, this is still the front line between North Korea and South Korea. You can see the North Koreans are literally across that concrete slab to the other side. And you're being watched at all time. In fact, there's a North Korean right behind me with the binoculars and that guard post over there watching us very, very closely. And of course, in this building, it's built across the military demarcation line, which is the actual border between North and South Korea. And that's where they have their conferences, and we can go in there and have a look. It's got quite a history. This building is used for negotiations between the North and the South, Americans and the joint security agencies, and the communists. And of course, what's unique about this building is it's built right along the border between North and South Korea. This table marks the line. The set of microphones along here is the border, and I'm now in North Korea. There's a lot of problems in these negotiations. There's a lot of little propaganda pieces being used all the time. You'll often see North Korean soldiers peering through the windows and making certain types of gestures like this. This is another example of how the North Koreans try to irritate the South Koreans. Both sides cannot occupy this building at the same time, so they have to bolt it at one end or the other. So this door leads to the north. So when the South Koreans go to leave, a soldier has to come back here and unbolt it. And in the past, the North Koreans have waited for that and tried to grab the soldier and pull him through into North Korea. So now a second soldier has to hold this position and hold the other soldier by his belt as he undoes the bolt. But the difficulty in dealing with the communists has been going on for a long time. This goes back to the Korean War, where the negotiations were taking place in this area, and they would break down and then men would die. And one of the situations in '51 is the communists went to the table as a delaying action, which would allow them time to regroup their troops, bring up more troops, and then launch further attacks on the UN forces. In the fall of 1951, the peace talks break down, and in an effort to restart the negotiations, the UN resumes its offensive. The Canadians advance quickly through the rugged Korean terrain and capture a series of hills east of the Samishan River Valley. The responsibility of holding the strategically important Hill 187 goes to the 2nd RCRs. the men dig in, wire positions, and construct outposts on the many spurs that extend into no man's land. The most exposed outpost is the Sangok, only 800 meters from the Chinese lines.
Okay, so what I'm thinking of is down here. Take the binoculars. We'll look it out on the map. See the saddle?
That's right. Yes. No, I think you've got it. No, that's it. That's it. My God, amazing. Outside of the fact it's got a bit more vegetation, looks not a lot different than we did then. They wanted the outpost manned by the most experienced platoons, and that one happened to be mine. And that's my birthday, the 2nd of November, and I saved a few quarts of beer, and I brought my section joint, my corporals in, and they wished me a happy birthday. And it was about 7:30, quarter to 8, and Jack Sargent, with my senior corporal, he was going to return to his position. He suddenly shouted, and he yelled, "Hey, boss, they're coming." We could hear some movement up towards the wire. And suddenly a voice shouted out in absolutely perfect English, "Canada boy, tonight you die." I got kind of startled. I said, "Well, come and get us, you son of a bitch." And they did. My signal said, "They're just over to the left." And there were 3 of them running right towards me. I had a flare pistol and my 9mm Browning. I shot 2 of them with my 9mm and 1 with the flare pistol. I put a new mag in my 9mm, and then suddenly they charged us through the same gap again. And there was a bugler standing there, oblivious to anything, blowing away, and he was moved within 10 feet. And I shot the bugle right to the back of his neck. It was a terrible thing, but there it went. But we didn't hear any more bugle calls from there. Suddenly Jack Sargent reported, "They're coming in on me." They blew a gap from between 6 and 8 feet wide, and then they charged. Eddie Bauer, a Bren gunner, just sat there, ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. And he filled that effort, and he just kept shooting until it was still. There was a lot of shouting and screaming, and so that stopped that particular attack. By this time, I was getting a report of casualties, wounded here, wounded there. I remember I had 28 men. So by this time, I had about 10 casualties. We didn't know it until after, but we were being hit by a full battalion of Chinese. That's, anywhere between 800 and 900 men. So I reported back that we're running out of ammunition. And I said, it's going to be hard, it's going to be difficult. And suddenly a voice came booming on an effort. "This is Big Sunray." It was the brigadier. He said, "Ed, you've got to hold. You're the cork in the bottle." I said, "I'll do the best I can, sir." I reported back. I said, "I have nothing left. Most of my wire was gone. We won't stop the next one. We just can't." Middleman said, "Do you think you can get out?" I said, "I won't leave without my wounded. Because you boxed me out with artillery." Then it was just a matter of moving out of the wire, and then I called in the stonk, and they started hammering the position. So I'd move back 50 up, what I thought was about 50 yards, and I would say, "Drop 50. And they just keep repeating that. Now, we just kept moving with that. was well after 4 before the first elements of my guys got to the company wire. I had, at that point, I had 15 wounded, 1 killed, and we left Campo. One platoon was given the order to reoccupy the position, and I said, I want to go back too. I want to get Campo. We saw Chinese bodies hanging on the wire in the position, and by the time in the month of account, it was anywhere between 45 and 50. And we picked up 5 wounded prisoners. And there was Campo in the slit trench with his rifle, and he'd been protecting the wounded. And I'm glad I lived long enough to be able to let them be recognized for what they did, because they're all dead now. I'm the last one.
I remember them every birthday, every 2nd of November is my time that I think about Remembrance Day. My Remembrance Day is the 2nd of November. I've never forgotten it, and I do the same thing every 2nd of November. I get by myself, I pour myself a drink, and I sit there, and I think about 2 platoon, Able Company, the Flying Deuce, and 28 heroes.
The incredible defense of the Sangok by the 2nd RCRs stops the Chinese attack. But within days, further along the Canadian line, the Chinese strike again. We are traveling on the highway north of Seoul, and with me is George Ferris, who fought with the 2nd Battalion Vandues in the fall of 1951. And this is the first time George has been back to Korea.
We want to take George back to the old battleground where his unit fought a major action and a significant action on the saddle between Hill 227 and Hill 355.
That was the worst place to be at that time, because the Chinese wanted all these positions, and we didn't want to give them to them.
Throughout November, the Chinese attacked the UN front and recaptured several major heights, leaving Hill 355 as the critical anchor of the UN line. In an effort to strengthen this key position, on November 22nd, the Vandues are ordered to occupy the dangerously exposed positions in front of the hill.
The area that you fought on is still essentially at war.
Well, it's on the demarcation line, or
yeah, just
DMZ.
It's right inside the DMZ. Yeah. So as we get closer, we'll see the barbed wire and the minefield signs. And
we don't have to go in the minefields.
No.
Okay.
No. Oh, well, if we do, you have to leave. George, here we are.
I see some of it. Oh yeah.
So we're going to take the what would be the supply route up, I guess.
Oh yeah.
Up to what would have been the Jeep head.
Yeah.
So you'll see all the stuff just like it was back in 1951.
Yeah, except for the bombing.
Yeah, no bombing.
Yeah, good.
Hopefully no bombing.
we go. Back up on the hill. This is getting familiar now a bit more than I thought after all. I hadn't seen it for almost 55 years.
So we're going to go up to the GP that's right on the shoulder of, off the peak.
Yeah.
And from there we'll get the view of the Chinese positions 227.
Yeah. Well, there it is. I see 227 there, and I see also the hill where at the bottom we parked our vehicles and climb up that hill to go right on the saddle. As I was going up to take the position, I met the British coming out of the hill. And as they came down, they said, okay, good luck, guys. Be careful, at 4 o'clock, the enemy will start firing at you. And we took it with a grain of salt, you know. We got up on top of the hill, and it was a hot dog stand that they had their weapon in. My couple and I didn't like the idea of going in a hot dog stand, so we decided to move the gun. And around 4 o'clock, as they had predicted, they start firing. I said, if we would have been in there, we would have been dead today, you know. Well, the first night we carry on digging, and we were being shelled by the enemy. You're in your hole, and you keep your head down, and you hope that it's going to stop soon. And it's scary. We had a dugout. The roof was supported by a beam of wood. I don't know where they got this tree here, but a big piece of a big beam of wood. One of our guys was in there, and when that bunker fell, when it was hit with a heavy bomb, the beam splintered, and one side of the beam got into the stomach of the guy and killed him on the spot there. You wish that it ends quick. And when it's heavy, you feel like a rat, you're caught. There was question about thoughts of retreating. Never did it came to the mind of any of the men in the company or the battalion. As a matter of fact, our CO told us that it's going to be hard. There'll be no panic, no overrun, and no withdrawing. There was never any thought of retreating. The Vandals don't retreat. They stay and fight.
Right now, George and I are traveling along the DMZ towards Hill 210. We are hoping to get a better view of the saddle between Hills 227 and 355, where George fought with the Vandus in November 1951.
Well, now it's starting to look like something that I recognize. I see it in the way that I used to see it. Oh, wow.
Here, we'll go over here. This is it?
Yeah,
This is it, George?
Yeah, now I see it better. The west side of 355. Oh,
This
wow,
is much,
wow.
much better than the other point. The other point we were up too high.
Yeah, I couldn't see it now.
So we're setting it up. The Americans are on the hill proper.
That's right.
And you guys are D companies in that little hollow area?
D company in the saddle there.
So where did you have your guns?
I had one gun right in the middle. I was with that one gun. Right in the middle of the dip there and on the forward position.
So you're very, very close to 227 all the time.
227, I said a guy with maybe a 7 or 6 iron playing golf could have put a ball on top of the hill there. That's how close we were.
On the 23rd, the Chinese launched the major assault on 355, and they
Okay.
drive off the Americans. The Americans bugged out.
Yeah,
Now,
you're right, yeah.
You're now in a very bad position because
Yeah.
the Chinese have 227,
And they have,
this huge,
That's right.
humongous Hill 355,
Yeah, yeah.
and you guys are piggy in the middle.
Hundreds of Chinese troops swarm onto the heights of 355, driving the Americans from the hill. Now they turn their attention to the Canadians and begin to attack the Vandus from 3 directions. If the Chinese can dislodge the defenders from the saddle, they will control Hill 355 and threaten all the Canadian positions to the south.
Our forward platoon is in a very bad situation because 227, the enemy on that position, could see that platoon. So they were just firing down on them. After trying hard, they could not hold the position. So they just moved the platoon out of there. And then here I am in the thick of battle, trying to see somebody, ready to shoot. And then I hear some noise, some people climbing the hill. Then I heard somebody say in French to me, don't fire, don't fire. This is Lieutenant McDuff from the Vandus. And my fingers were white from pressing on that trigger. I was just about to let it. I almost killed the poor people. I almost killed them. But I didn't. And one of the soldiers was told probably to go and report to the major that they had been overrun and they had moved to join the other platoon. So he said, are the men all gone? He said, yes, they're all gone. So that's when he asked for support fire, tank fire, to hit the position where the enemy had captured. And then during that evening, Leo Major, one of our scout and sniper, they went up and checked that position.
When we reached the crest, we charged the enemy positions, firing as we ran. Not long after, we could see a large enemy force preparing for a counterattack. I waited until they were almost on top of us, and then I called in the mortar barrage.
It got so heavy. It was unbelievable. It seems that our support, all our artillery and mortars were firing at the same time as the enemy was doing the same thing. Around the end of the day, on the 24th, then it seems that the Chinese saw that they couldn't take it, and they probably decided at that time to withdraw.
The Chinese attack on Hill 355 was a major initiative to force back the UN front. It was the stand made by the Vandus against enormous odds that saved the day. Chinese losses were estimated in the thousands, while the Vandus suffered 49 casualties. Their defense of the saddle ranks with Kapyong as one of the finest actions fought by the Canadians in the Korean War.
I start realizing when we went to the South Gate and I looked at all the buildings. And then I looked at all the people, families, little kids with them. They all had smiles on their face. Around where I was, I kept looking at them. And I said, these people are happy. And I said, this is because of us. Yeah. And that's the first time. Canadians, man or woman that came here, should be proud. They did a goddamn good job. And I'm proud, and especially proud of my regiment. Le 22. Je me souviens.
After the stand by the Vandus and the saddle at Hill 355, UN Command issued orders to stop offensive operations. The focus now is going to be on the peace talks. That changed the face of the war from one of movement to static warfare, much like the First World War. So that meant trenches and barbed wire, minefields and patrols. It was a war more of their father's generation than their own. But it was clear that the fighting was far from over. This is a rice paddy in Korea, and you can see the hills behind me, and the trees and the ridges, and this is the type of terrain that the Canadians fought over in Korea. At the end of 1951, the character of the Korean War changed completely. It went from open warfare to static warfare, a war of entrenched positions and massed artillery support, but it was no less bloody. For the Canadians who served here in 1952 and 53, the Korean War was a war of waiting, watching, and patrolling.
We were going down into the valley. We were almost there, and we saw these shadows coming up at us. Lieutenant Sykes turned to me, and he whispered, "There's 3 Chinese just ran across the path." It was like walking into a wall, where you think you're going to maybe get hit with something any moment. You're as afraid as you'll ever be in your life, because you think this is maybe death coming in the next couple of seconds.
We're driving out of Seoul north towards the demilitarized zone, and what's clear in Korea is that they're still on a war footing. You can see barbed wire entanglements all along the river. There's guard posts, and you can see gun emplacements and bunkers all over the place. In military terms, Seoul is a very vulnerable city. It's only about 30 to 40 kilometers from North Korea, and therefore it could be hit by all sorts of weaponry. And it's sort of a strange contrast to see all this military equipment and fortifications living side by side with such a vibrant city. So we're still on the highway north of Seoul, but we're getting closer to the junction of the Han and the Imjin rivers, which means that the communists are about 1 kilometer away across the river. So you see a lot more military positions. And just over there, you'll see an embedded tank. And I'm not going to point to it because I don't think they'd appreciate us filming them. But you can just look over my shoulder, and this is an example of what we're going to see from here on up to the DMZ. This is another example of military preparations in South Korea, and this is a tank block. You can see that it looks like an overpass, but in fact, it's got 2 columns. And in the event of a North Korean attack, they would blow the columns, and this giant slab of concrete would come right down. And of course, this would block the road, stopping all North Korean armor. We're now passing through the restricted zone, which is a higher level of military preparedness. And then we're going to go up into the demilitarized zone itself. And the area we're interested in are the hills that were captured by the Canadians in 51 and held through 1952 and 53. And what's remarkable is the South Koreans today are using exactly the same positions, the same locations as the Canadians held back in the Korean War. And it's amazing to me that the line has not moved forward in more than 50 years. Since the fall of 1951, all along the UN front, the Korean War has devolved into a stalemate. Hundreds of thousands of men on both sides dig in, fortify positions, and prepare for a different kind of war. In October 1952, 3 Canadian battalions are holding frontline positions north of the Samichon River. And as they did almost a year before, Canadian troops once again move into positions on the strategically important Hill 355. The war had gone quite quiet in 1952. There had been very few major Chinese attacks on the Canadian positions. Even by October, for 10 months, everything had gone quite well. Casualties had mounted. There's patrolling and mortar shells, always some action. It wasn't until 3 weeks into October that the next major action took place. This is the infamous Hill 355. The honor of holding this position went to the Royal Canadian Regiment, and on about the 17th of October, they started to notice a lot more communist artillery fire and mortar fire coming in on their positions, and particularly ranging their positions, which is always a bad sign. The Chinese always used infiltration techniques, so they would try to find a weak point, and then of course they would plan it in advance. These attacks are very well planned. Both sides know the peace negotiations are going on, and I don't think either side wanted to risk too much. And this was true of the Chinese. Gone were the days of the massive attacks across minefields. Now they were far more concerned about the preservation of their own lives. But they would determine where the weak points were, and they would often work at night even to remove mines and make pass-through minefields or cut barbed wire to try to get in. In this situation, the Chinese had infiltrated around the position and even dug advanced bunkers as jump-off positions so that they could move very quickly. The UN controlled the air, and they also had an advantage in artillery, so whatever the Chinese did, it had to be quick. So they had to get into your position right away. So they'd move up as many men as they could, maybe 100, 200 men into these positions, and once the artillery fire ended for them, they're through the wire.
I got halfway up the trench, and we had Chinese coming over the wall. Somebody started to fire, and I picked up fire with my Sten gun. Emptied that off. Then we just tossed them over the side of the trench.
Hundreds of Chinese attacked the Canadians with the intent of killing as many as possible. They overrun the forward platoons. Now the Canadians have no choice but to bring down artillery on their own positions. All along these hills, the artillery, the tanks, the mortars, everything is letting loose on the Chinese. So about 1 a.m. in the morning on the 23rd, the RCRs go back to their position and the artillery has done its job. And they've cleared out the Chinese. They made their point. They wanted to inflict some pain on the Canadians, and they had moved out. The Chinese raid on Hill 355 cost the first RCRs 35 wounded and 18 men killed. The costliest battle for the Canadians to date in Korea. The battle that took place on Hill 355 in October 1952 was a bloody nose for the Royal Canadian Regiment. But an attack on such a position should have been expected. 355 is the most important position in this sector, and the communists would dearly love to have a piece of it. Every sector had their own special piece, special linchpin. And within a month, the Canadians would get a taste of another infamous piece of the line, and it was called the hook. One of the problems with the Korean War is that the battles were all fought in a tight area of ridges and ravines that I can't tell apart. And it's very difficult going from a map from 1950 to be absolutely positive you got the right positions. The other thing is that there's only limited access to a lot of these positions because most of them are in the DMZ or very close to it. So with the cooperation of the South Korean Army, we're going to try to get into there and see what we can find on what was known as the old hook positions.
Okay. 지금 출발하세요. 우리 10명입니다.
Where is he going? Where is he going? I'm not sure.
It's a little difficult to try to establish from the old maps onto the new maps to make sure we end up in the same right place. This is a very complicated area. The terrain is very difficult. There's lots of ridges and bumps, and it's very hard to read. So now we got to make sure we're going to go to the right place.
Oh, they don't have a no-P position here. They can bring us here. That's the closest they can bring us.
Okay.
Okay.
So this we're going to get up. The closest we can get is the what is marked as the B Company position here. But at the same time, we should get a really clear view across the Samishan River Valley to see the other Canadian positions towards Hill 355. So it'll be quite interesting to see what we can see from here. Most of the battlefields of the Canadians in Korea are in the demilitarized zone. So we're going into what is really a battle zone. And we're going to be escorted by a patrol of South Korean soldiers all the way up. And I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be interesting. We've got an escort with us. And we're going right into the DMZ, into the GP post that's close to the hook. So we're going to have to stop filming in a couple seconds because we're getting close to one of the defensive positions. So we're going to be going up to the top of the hill, which is, of course, it's going to be the outpost, or the GP they call it here, which is in the middle of the demilitarized zone. It also was a Canadian battlefield. So we're going to try and find the hook positions as closely as we can. So from there, we'll be able to see the North Korean positions of today, as well as the Communist Chinese positions of 1951-52. So it's sort of going back in time a little bit, but the tension is still there. I just wonder how long this can go on for.
여기서 요쪽을 배경으로 찍으시면 됩니다. 여기, 요쪽. 저쪽은 안 되고 저기가 적 GP거든요.
That's the North Korean post over there?
That is the enemy post.
This point, so we're here, yeah, 248, and that's
Okay.
that's 132 is that right there.
Now here is North Korea zone.
Yeah.
We can't go there.
Oh yeah, or one way.
Right.
Here is called HID Hill. HID Hill. Do you know HID?
HID? No.
HID is a special forces of South Korean to infiltrate to North Korea.
Well.
You know the noise, the explosion?
Yes.
Just before you heard? That is the noise of mine explosion. The animal.
Oh, an animal's gone on the mine.
Yeah. Press the mine, so mine brought up.
Okay. It's good to know it's not.
Yeah.
조심해야 됩니다. 그래서 길이 아닌 곳은 절대 다니지 않고 있어요, 우리도.
So you have to be very careful not to go the minefield because there is only road sign. There is a triangle
There's red
sign.
triangles.
Red triangles saying the minefield, so you don't have to. You shouldn't go there.
요게 그 연천평야하고
이게 3,200.
삼이천.
Samishan River.
예.
Yeah.
삼이천.
So we're looking over here.
Yeah.
예. 이게 잘못됐어. Long. This line is long.
Yeah, this is old. This is from
아, okay. Now
1952.
here.
Up here, okay,
Yeah.
right at 355. Okay, now that makes sense.
Okay.
It's hard when you use the old maps, see?
In the winter of 1952, the Hook was the UN's most important position in the sector west of the Samishan River. Consequently, it received special attention from the Chinese, who were only 300 yards away and within easy striking distance. The men defending the Hook had to be constantly on guard, watching for signs of an impending communist attack.
This position was very, very important because if they could take the Hook, they could literally outflank some of the other positions, which you can see off to the right, which is all down the line here, which is where the Canadians were for most of the Korean War. And so it was always very important that this position be held. But the battle we're interested in is the one that took place in November 1952, which is the first action of the 3rd Battalion, Princess Patricia's. The Hook was held by the Black Watch, the Royal Highlanders, and they were very fortunate to be the men who were in support of them. So they're actually in these little valleys over here. They had 2 companies, and the companies were in consecutive order. So if anything went wrong, they would move up into varying positions. And what happened on the night of the 18th and 19th November, the Chinese put down a lot of artillery fire and cut the position off. And of course, they went after the Warsaw position, which was the lead one. So the Patricians, they had to come up through these little valleys, move up into position, and then launch the attack to help recapture the position.
It takes a long time to draw close to the Hook. The great explosions are unending. Just above my head, I know the air is filled with jagged, searing shrapnel. We come on 2 sandbag bunkers. There's a huge mound of earth to our left, dumped by high explosive shells. A Scott's booted feet jut grotesquely from its center. We move forward, tread on bodies in the bottom of the trench. I'm scared now. The reality of battle death came the instant I saw the bodies of the Scots.
To their credit, they came up through here, and by the time they had arrived, another unit of the Black Watch had recaptured the position, so they were able to drive off the communists. But you can see from here as well, you get a really nice view of the communist positions, and they're much closer here. This river valley is much more narrow than this Samishan. And of course, after that position, until 53, early 53, the Canadians patrolled this position and went out into the lines and ran into a few problems there. But when they knocked the communists back in November, it sort of calmed them down a little bit. But this area of the Samishan Valley was where all the patrols used to go out. And it's also where the Canadians suffered most of their casualties during the Korean War. For example, I would say, out of the 400 or so that were killed, 350, 370 were killed in this area along here. This is where the Canadians took all their casualties.
All along the Samishan, throughout 1952 and 1953, the static war grinds on. And as the peace talks drag at Panmunjom, life for the men in the line becomes routine, often tedious, but always dangerous, with death never very far away. We are on the road north of Seoul, approaching the DMZ. We're going up to Hill 187, which was a battlefield for many of the Canadians who fought in Korea.
During the Korean War, Canadian troops served overseas for a 12-month period, and then they would be rotated out and new troops would come in. And one of the soldiers in the 3rd Battalion, Royal Canadian Regiment, was Terry Maher. And Terry, can you explain how you decided to come to Korea?
I, like a lot of the fellows at the time, grew up with a lot of heroes in our towns and villages from the Second World War. And there was a certain amount of romanticism in me, as it was with a lot of the volunteers that came over here.
So when you landed in South Korea, you started to make your way up?
We went up in what is called the Pusan Express, and it's an old steam engine, and the cars all close together, and small seats built for Orientals, and I'm over 6 feet. The train was surrounded by Korean kids, and they were always saying Shushan Joe, 25 cents, a pack of cigarettes, and so forth. We felt quite sorry for them, and we gave them what we had. The train started to pull out, and the little kids put the rocks to the train, and they were, some of the rocks were coming through the window, and so we were ducking down as the train pulled out.
So now we're on the route up the Hill 187. It's now an established position for the South Korean Army. Same locations as you guys chose. We'll be able to get a clear view of the old no man's land, which is still the no man's land. Right. The Chinese positions, everything, except now it's North Koreans. Yeah. So much hasn't changed.
I hope I recognize it, because I was over all of it and all of the valleys. I think I spent most of last night thinking about dead people.
So Terry, do you recognize this place?
What I recognize quite well, or impressed with just looking at it, is the hills, the Chinese hills in the foreground, how they fold up and higher, and they get darker and darker as they go into the background. I always thought it was quite foreboding. Chinese hills were right across the valley, and I always thought they were 300 or 400 yards from the front. From the sharp end positions where Charlie Company was. We'd be in the front line anywhere from 30 days to 2 months. On Hill 187 here, I was on here for, I think, 58 days. There was no civilization up here, and there was a person lived on his wits and his reputation. There was a natural leadership that took over up here. The most dominant thing was the fear of the Chinese, and the second thing, almost as bad, was the cold, and it dominated everybody's existence. And there was always well, you got a wind here now. There was always a cold wind coming from the north, and it cut through, and you couldn't put your parkas up because you couldn't hear the shells coming in. Sitting in your slit trenches here, and in other positions too, they would have a loudspeaker would come from across the valley over there, and somewhere back of 166. And it would start off with very sentimental music. It would be American music or Canadian music, and very, very sentimental. And it would be always a woman's voice singing to you.
It always hurts to say goodbye. Why do we try to hide the pain in our hearts?
They always called us Americans and say it would start off American officer, American soldier. This is not your war. You should go home now. Why are you fighting over here and suffering like this when a rich capitalist is having turkey dinner with your wife? You'd get that for a couple of hours, and then after a while, the artillery would start to fire salvos over there, and then it would stop. At midnight, we'd pick up our food, and you'd go one or two at a time because you didn't want people bunching up around it because of shells coming in. The meals consisted of often macaroni, or they consisted of cut up turkey. It would be prepared back over the hill in a mess tent. We used to get a quart of beer every night. It ended up that there was more beer than water, and so occasionally people without any water would shave in the beer. Most of the time we would be in our slit trenches looking out across the valley, but if you're in one of the reserve companies back here, about every third night you'd be on a patrol out in the valley out there. And the valley in front of us here, in front of 166, and down through the wider part of the Samoshon, when we were up here in 187, that's where we did our patrolling.
All along the front, in an effort to seize the initiative from the Chinese, UN forces constantly patrol the narrow valleys between the front lines. Every night, men venture into the darkness, probing Chinese positions, never sure where or when the enemy would strike.
This is a very typical terrain that you would find on a patrol when you're coming down into the valley in towards the rice paddies. Getting ready for a patrol, we would start sometime in the late afternoon. You put camouflage paint or blackening on your running shoes. You put it on your face and you put it on the backs of your hands. After dark, we proceeded out towards the valley. We would come down through the minefield gap. Patrol probably would walk along a paddy bun like this, so they would have the protection of the paddy bun. And if something happened, you'd all go down on one knee, and the lieutenant would look out this way and to his front, and the second man, which would be myself, we'd look out to the front and this way, and the shotgun guard, who was also carrying a Sten gun, that was just a term for him, shotgun guard, he'd be behind here covering the rear. We would wait a while and listen and be very, very patient, because we knew the Chinese were very, very patient, and we would eventually move, but move very, very cautiously. The purpose of patrolling is you didn't want the Chinese to control the valley, because if they could control the valley, then they could control what they wanted to do in the positions. You don't fire on them, if at all possible, because if you fire on them, they can pinpoint your weapons firing. We never saw them. We heard them. They were like phantoms. On a reconnaissance patrol, I was the radio operator. I had a 300 set. Some of the men didn't mind patrolling. Some feared it very much and didn't want to leave the trenches. I volunteered, but I was still very much afraid. On this particular patrol, we moved out into the valley, and so Vance was in the lead with the sniper scope, and he would look through the sniper scope like this, and then he would move 2 or 3 feet or 4 feet, and he would look through it again and move it around to see if there's Chinese. As we were coming towards our second objective, we heard a Chinese patrol. We took the ground, called in fire from our artillery. You could smell the smoke off the exploding shells of cordite. You could hear the zing of shrapnel going over your head and some of it zipping through the grass. So what happened then is we moved on, and somewhere in the valley, whatever happened, I don't know, but the lieutenant stopped and turned to me and he said, "We're lost." We went up in the back of a hill. All of a sudden, somebody said, "Halt, who goes there?" Lieutenant, who was pretty strung out, said to him, "Young man, that's no way to challenge." And when he said that, the young man opened up with his machine gun. That was the end of the lessons on how to challenge. When you're in a routine, though, and you're getting shells and casualties, and they're light, and they're here and they're there, you don't think much of an attack. You think you're fairly safe, so that when it does come, it's a surprise.
In the early spring of 1953, the peace talks once again stalled. To improve their bargaining position, the Chinese increased their selective attacks on key UN positions. At the end of April, the second rotation of the RCRs had taken place, and the newly arrived 3rd Battalion was ordered to defend positions on and around Hill 187. 187 is a massive hill with many ridges that jut deep into no man's land, easy targets for the communist raids.
On 187, there was quite a bit of shelling all over the hills. Patrols were going out. There was nothing amiss, but the shelling intensified as the days got along. I didn't know whether something was going to happen or not until the patrol got hit out here. About 200, 300 yards out, they were ambushed by the Chinese. I was in a slit trench, and I started to fire the Bren gun. And then I saw the tracer bullets coming from over there at me. And I moved until only my hands were up over the parapet firing the Bren gun. The patrol from Able Company that went out that night, they found their way back, dribbled back. I don't know how many came back, but a good number of them came back, and they were down there when the bombardment came in.
The artillery attack on 187 on May 2nd was the heaviest bombardment on a Canadian position during the Korean War. But this was only a prelude to what was to come. On May 2nd, 1953, the Communists direct a devastating artillery attack on the RCR's positions on Hill 187. The Chinese target the exposed Canadian outpost deep in no man's land, but the RCRs are unaware that this is only the beginning.
I was told at the time that it was the heaviest bombardment in history for Canadian soldiers. Guys in the forward slopes, a lot of them were stunned. So when the Chinese and wounded. So when the Chinese did come into the trenches there, they were not recovered from the bombardment. Brunt of the infantry attack came into 7 and 8 platoon down in the sharp end down there. And they got into the trenches of 7 platoon and some of the trenches of 8 platoon. And that's where they took the prisoners from. Took them across the valley. Right in the brunt of the attack, right at 7 platoon down on the sharp end was Ed Hollier.
I could see that we were fighting a losing cause, and something had to be done to get the Chinese to back off. I requested that artillery be brought down on my position. When the barrage lifted, I went forward and found the position still overrun. The Chinese were everywhere. As we were passing a bunker, I was jumped by 3 Chinese. I dove over a sandbag wall and noticed a box of grenades in the corner. I started lobbing them at my oppressors. There was an explosion, a shout of pain, and then the Chinese took off.
After the battle was over, the Chinese had retreated. Trenches were down, and some soldiers got buried in the trenches, and 4 or 5 days later, they were carrying out the bodies of Canadians. Il-27 had the heaviest casualties of the Korean War for a Canadian unit in a short battle. There were about 80 casualties. 35 of those were KIAs, or killed in action. We felt it was a raid that they had come, and it was politically motivated to influence the peace talks at Panmunjom and the Americans about casualties. This type of thing happened. You look up and down the valley, you could see this happening 2 or 3 times a week with some company or someplace getting hit.
Throughout the summer of 1953, the Communists continued to launch a series of brutal attacks all along the front. But Canadian and UN forces hold the line. In July 1953, after 3 long years of fighting and over 1 million dead, both sides finally agreed to an armistice. And on July 27th, the Canadians fired their last round of the war. For the Canadians, the war in Korea is over. 22,000 Canadians came to Korea to fight the Communists. 1,300 were wounded, and more than 300 lost their lives. The Canadians who died in Korea are buried in one place, the United Nations Cemetery at Pusan.
So Terry, the RCRs from 1953 are buried in 2 plots. I know there's a couple of them here. There's at least one in the back row, so we can check them out. See if we can find them over here.
Petty Redmond is from Halifax. He's probably the oldest soldier in Korea in the Canadian contingent who was killed. He was a very, very kind man, too kind to be a cook, actually. I was in the tent with Patty the day before he got killed, and I told Patty that I was going to Japan in maybe a month's time, and he pulled some yen out of his pocket, and he said, spend it on yourself. And the next day he was, a mortar bomb came into the top of the tent, and he was killed, and there was about 7 people wounded, I think, or something like that. And there were tin cans and scattered for 150 feet, 200 feet over the sides of the hills. Morning Star was a veteran of a lot of action. He was on Hill 355 and other places. And we went on patrols together, and I was the radio operator and he was the shotgun guard. He was wounded and then in a trench, and he was evacuated about 1:30 in the morning by a little silver helicopter. And he died 10 or 11 days later in hospital. Doug Benton trained me. And I think of all the officers I met, I would admire him the most. When the patrol got hit on 187 out by the Samashon River, he, in the second patrol, went to rescue the first patrol, and he got down as far as the minefield gap, and there was a lot of fire going on at that time. Everything was wild, and he shouted at them, come through me, and he raised his hands out, and he got hit and was gunned down in a minute or two. And in the end, they paid a great sacrifice that there's no greater sacrifice that any man can give you. Yeah, I pray for them. I prayed for them last night and this morning.
The first Canadians to arrive in Korea were the 2nd Battalion PPCLI, who earned their place in history with their incredible defense at Kapyong. One of these men was David Crook.
The Kapyong guys, I think they're in that row over here. I want to have a look at them.
Hayes. No, no face there either. Carr I knew. He was Ricker's machine gunner, but he was killed up in D Company position. You always think it could have happened to you, but somehow it didn't. And you always say, Jesus, I'm glad I'm still here, and I'm glad I'm not there. You just feel so lucky to be alive, and you look at these poor guys who aren't so lucky, or weren't so lucky. They're still here. I guess that's the way I feel.
In the fall of 1951, Ed Master Nardi and his platoon from the 2nd RCRs defended the Sangok Spur from hundreds of Chinese attackers. Incredibly, during this action, only one of his men was killed.
We'll look for compost grave. He's in this plot over here. I think he's in 3rd or 4th row, but we'll look down here. I really want to see that.
Curry. Untold. Been a long time. Help me, O God, when death is near, to mock the haggard face of fear. And if I die, and die I must, my soul will triumph in the dust. You did a wonderful job. You saved a lot of our boys. And I'm sure you know that now. But you are. Got a lot of good company here, bro. A lot of good company here. And they're with you forever. But we haven't forgotten. And most of us are gone now. There was a Chunu. That's one of the few, if not the only one left. I will never forget you. And what you did. The Sangha. Soldier. Hero.
The Canadians who served in Korea should be justifiably proud of what they accomplished. We should never forget what our men did in Korea. But the peace they won is even today still fragile.